Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another Geo-Institute live stream. Yes, it is still the summer of live. You are right in the middle of it. Although those days may look like they are waning, they are not. You've still got another 6 solid weeks of summer from the Geo-Institute, and we will continue to bring you that high-quality programming that you know, love, and expect. My name is Brad Keeler. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and welcome to episode number 2 of Hour of Scour. Many years ago, I think it was a conversation with either Ming Xiao or Rodolfo Sancio, probably Rodolfo from Geosyntech. We talked about having a Scour hour or Hour of Scour, and here we are. We aired episode 1 back in May. The guest was Jean-Louis Briot from Texas A&M University. And we're going to plan to do this quarterly, so be with us and be on the lookout for that every now and then. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, after you watch this very informative and mildly hilarious program today, you should head over to geoinstitute.org, and there you will find out a great many things about us, including that we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And if you like what you see today, and we are bringing it, viewers, you will like it. You should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. One more plea before we begin our actual content for the day. In my left hand, I am holding a Ralph Peck bobblehead. You could have one just like it by making your contribution to Geo-Institute student programs. If you head to the aforementioned website, in the top right, you will see a link that says something like Student Participation Fund. If you click on that, you can make your donation and receive an incredible thank you gift. If you don't want a Ralph Peck bobblehead by some strange coincidence, you can also get a quarter zip with the GI logo on it. It's very handsome, suitable for really any activity that you're going to undertake in this life. There are a great many other thank you gifts as well. Contribution levels, honestly, if you wanted to give us $1, we would take it. But the thank you gifts start at $25. So you want to make sure you do that. Ralph Peck, $96 or more, because our founding year was 1996. With all that out of the way, we have a great program for you today. We have Coastal Geotechnics whiz. I believe that's how I put it in the first email that we sent out. Maybe she could be maestro of Coastal Geotechnics. Nina Stark is our guest today. But the host of our august program from Texas State University and the director of a university transportation center that maybe she'll tell you about, it is Stacy Kaleza. Stacy, welcome. Thank you for hosting. Thank you for doing this.
Sure, happy to be here for episode 2. I have told everyone I talked to in the past 48 hours to please come and watch this live event, including all of my colleagues who are not even civil engineers. And they keep telling me, I don't know what Scour is. And I said, you're in luck. Come eat a sandwich and come listen to us talk for a while. It'll be informative. It'll be fun. Hope you have a good laugh. Yes, I am Stacy Kaleza. I am an associate professor at Texas State University, and I am also the director of the Create University Transportation Center, which incidentally focuses on coastal infrastructure durability. So we were really excited to have our Scour-specific podcast today now veer a little bit to focus on something near and dear to my heart, coastal geotechnics. And if you think about anything coastal, as much as I would like to think you're thinking about my UTC Center, if you're a geotech, you think about Dr. Stark. So for a brief introduction, we are so excited again to have Dr. Nina Stark here. She is an associate professor at the University of Florida, and I will let you introduce yourself, Nina, beyond that.
Thanks, Stacey and Brandon. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. Big shoes to fill, however, after your last guest. So I hope I can live up to all these expectations, but I'm certainly very excited to be here. My name is Nina Stark. I'm associate professor at the University of Florida. I'm working, as already mentioned, in coastal aspects of geotechnical engineering. And I do a lot of field work, and so I encounter quite a bit of scour holes of different shapes and forms and dramatics. And I'm pretty excited to have the opportunity to chat a little bit more about that here.
Great. Before, I know you have a few slides, we'd like to have some background information, but before we launch the slides, I think it's always important to start with Scour has traditionally in civil engineering lived in hydraulics. We do have a small but mighty group of geotechs. We have our small technical group within the GI. We actually got a lot of papers this year for Geo-Congress, so that's exciting. But how did you, a German physicist, get into Scour?
Yeah, so by finding the holes, right? So I worked actually at that time as a PhD student in Germany on the first German offshore wind park. And so they are working with the collaborators for Federal Agency of Hydrography. This topic of Scour was really brought to me. And when we worked in the parks, we had the chance to work practically before the windmills were installed and then do regular surveying. And so while before I did not really, I thought, okay, then there's a hole under there. Who cares really, right? Nice for the lobsters to move in and have a little home. But then actually seeing how dramatic these scour holes could be, I developed more of an interest for it. And then we also in that example saw that actually finer sediment types started to settle into the scour hole. So you not only saw a morphological change, you also actually saw a change in superficial soil type that is now around as foundation. And I think that really sparked my interest in going back to how does a physicist look at that? So I actually saw them first on sonar images, right? And so then there's this interdisciplinary problem, and you already mentioned it, that Scour is not necessarily traditionally at home in the geotechnical engineering world, but it is a very interdisciplinary problem because obviously we need the hydraulics folks to be involved here because that's the driver, right? But then what is moved is the soil, so we need the geotechs in there too. And to be honest, also the structural engineer. So it's a highly interdisciplinary problem. And I think that makes it so intriguing. This is one of the problems that you cannot solve alone, in your discipline. You actually have to bring a lot of friends with different backgrounds and perspectives to tackle this. And it is a very challenging problem.
Cool. With that, it's good to have a little bit of background information for the rest of our conversation. So if you want to give us your brief overview, Scour,
Sure.
According to Dr. Stark.
Yes. So I hope you can see the presentation now, and the presentation will perfect. So
it looks perfect.
Put together a very short few slides, and they're fairly basic, but I hope they get a few main points across. So last of these shows, you guys talked a lot about the fundamentals of Scour, and I think that was super informative. I think what I want to bring home here on this slide for coastal environments is that it's so you have to suddenly deal with a multitude of these different influencing factors, right? So suddenly you're not only dealing with currents, you're also dealing with waves, tidal currents, and potentially during a storm event or an inundation event, just water in places where there's usually no water, right? What raises this question, should I think about Scour if I'm actually having a structure that is not in the water or should not be in the water, but may be in the water during an event, right? Then with regard to soils, obviously very similarly as in other environments, we find pretty much all of the above in coastal environments, right? We see rocky shorelines, we see gravelly shorelines, sand, silts, clays, a lot of organics. We have critters digging around there, making like holes and cavities and changing soil water interaction. So it's very diverse depending on where you go, right? It goes from shallow to deep, it goes to rapid flows to limited, and that can change in time and space. And then also thinking about actually the objects that we are concerned about. I mean, we can have houses on stilts, right? Hopefully usually not in the water, but kind of a little bit out of the water, but they're on stilts for a reason, right? Probably because they will see water at some point. Bridges, obviously, piers, piles, roads, pipelines, very traditional topic, cables, moorings, any type of foundation, seawalls, breakwaters. And then maybe a topic that a lot of people don't think about is also unexploded ordnances, what is actually one of the first Scour topics that are also worked at when I was working in Hawaii between my degrees and was looking for lost mustard gas bombs that were deposited after the Second World War because they were making trouble on land. And back in the 50s, people were thinking, okay, if we drop them far enough offshore, they will never come back. What we now know is not the case. But so for unexploded ordnances, scour becomes actually a double problem, because it's not only a problem if they're scouring out and falling into the hole. If they have done that, maybe you're happy, right? And you're happy that they're capped and they're under sediment and that keeps it there in place. But then if they get re-exposed, then suddenly they're back. So it's actually also a really interesting problem there. Then I have a few examples to just show maybe the audience the variability and variety of how scour can look in coast environments. So here you're seeing a private property after Hurricane Helene. This is Horseshoe Beach, Florida. And so you have practically severe scour behind that sheet pile seawall. And I'm pretty sure there was also scour on the other side. But there was a slab foundation pretty much all over that stretched this whole area. And you see it's all scoured out. In this case, we know that actually the storm surge was 12 feet or 4 meters above the water levels you're seeing here. So everything that you're seeing here was well underwater, not just slightly underwater, but well underwater, and you had waves raging on it. Suddenly this property was practically standing in the ocean, and not only in an ocean, in a raging ocean, right? And you see what it has done to it. It practically ripped out all the concrete, and you see the severe damages to this property. And again, this is actually on the onshore side of your seawall. Here's the opposite. So this is an example from Hurricane Harvey, 2018, Surfside Beach in Texas. And I love this example because actually not much happened. Compared to the previous image, there's not much structural damage here. However, you can pay attention to the details. So first of all, this darker water you're seeing is a deeper channel. That's a scour runoff that actually developed during the hurricane. And for me, this was the most beautiful, and I'm sorry for people who are suffering from scour, but this is a beautiful scour runoff, just like a textbook, right? So we very rarely actually see that because they vanish very quickly after the event. However, one tricky thing that I want to point out here, you see that on the pictures, like if we compare, for example, C and D, you see that in D on the bottom right, you have a couple of meters before the scour or between the scour runnel where the water is and where that rubble mound seawall is. So that's really great, right? So that means no hole at the seawall. This is the same place. We are just looking now the other direction, and you see that at that place, actually the runnel approached that rubble mound seawall. And you see that there actually some of these big boulders or cobbles like actually rolled into that runnel. It did not lead to a failure, but so that means we are seeing some first damage. And in particular, if we're now talking about subsequent storm events, these are things we have to pay attention to. What is interesting is that nowadays our models for a stretch like this is a 1 mile stretch, right? We are struggling to actually predict why in the one case we have it right at the seawall and in the other it's away. We know theoretically how the physics work, but we actually struggle to get the data to model that correctly. Here's this example from an offshore wind farm you see on the left-hand side. So these are side scan sonar images. So you're practically looking at like the backscatter or how much of your echo is coming back. So darker edges are less reflectors, brighter, strong reflectors. And that's also the reason why on the left-hand side, you see that white ghosty feature. That's actually a tripod foundation made of metal. And then you see these dark kind of like weird cloudy things. So that is actually your big scour hole that is underneath that structure. And it's actually interesting because it's not that much at each leg because it's a tripod, but it has a big global scour hole underneath. On the right-hand side, you see a jacket foundation. Again, you have to pay a little bit more attention. So you see these ghost-like features, and it's also lying on the side, unfortunately. But here you see the holes are actually at each of the 4 legs, right? You see a more each foundation, the smaller leg, but it's much less deep. And so this is a great example how different foundation types are changing this. And just as a slight comment, so this is under 30 meters of water, 90 feet of water, right? So scour is not only a shallow water problem. If you have enough current, if you have angry enough waves, what you can certainly get in the North Sea, then this also becomes a problem for deeper conditions. Here I snuck in a not coastal example, but I just wanted to put a few things in people's mind what I think are topics we should consider when we talk about scour. So typically we are concerned about scour around structure as how we design the structure, but I think we have to think about debris. So here you see actually in this reconstruction from LiDAR and from bathymetry in this river, you see this bridge that is kind of falling into the river there. That is a collapsed bridge. This is the Ahr Valley in Germany. And we had a huge scour hole. So this river is usually just like 2 feet deep, and the scour hole was 9 feet. And there's not even a bridge pier there. It's just debris that created a huge hole. So now imagine you have actually that debris jamming up against structures, making the structures bigger. So all your scour mitigation goes possibly out of the window because you simulated all of that for the original structure, but debris is changing your structure. Another topic I want people to think about is infilling of the scour hole. And I think Dr. Boyot has already for decades made a big point of that, how important it is that we have to think about it. This is an example from Tropical Storm Melissa in Duck, North Carolina at a pier measured with an acoustic scour monitor. And you just, the lines you're seeing are practically the same measurement, just at slightly different angles. The thing I want to get across, so from left to right, we are going in time. So the development of your scour hole took longer than the infill. So this scour hole practically fully filled in within a very, very short time. What that means to me as a field worker and also often doing reconnaissance, we should expect that we're almost always too late to measure a scour actually as bad as it was. So that means we should think about how we're actually measuring scour and how to deal with this infill problem. Another thing that I want to just put in people's minds is this is an example after Hurricane Michael, Mexico Beach, Florida, and these are all inundated areas. So this is actually nothing that should be in the water, but it was exposed from that storm surge. And you see this example here and you're like, oh, who cares about this little puddle? So the thing that we cared about here is that we were actually unable to predict how deep the scour is from the flow conditions alone. And so one thing that popped into our mind, there's a process that is called liquefaction from ocean waves, where actually sand starts becoming a suspension. So it fully liquefies like quicksand, right? You're just sinking in, and that means water can just pick it up from the wave cycles, not only from earthquakes. Most geotechnical engineers are more used to liquefaction from earthquakes, but you can also get that from ocean waves. And so here the hypothesis we came up to, and we could not prove it, but we could at least put a few puzzle pieces together that this is a feasible explanation, was that actually liquefaction from the waves in this inundation area increased the scour well beyond what just the flow conditions would have done. So that means even if you're on land, but near the coast in an inundation area, maybe you not only have to think about scour from just your flows, but you have to also consider other processes like liquefaction. And this is all I have, actually.
Cool. Thank you. It leads to a lot of good questions. Before we get into our questions, or I guess my questions, don't forget if you have a question for any of us, including Brad, because he's obviously very knowledgeable about scour, feel free to put it in the chat, and one of us will read it to make sure that we cover it. You look like you want to speak.
But I do have questions for Nina, too. You get to go first, though, as the host.
Thank you. Thank you. I felt like when I was thinking about it and my own personal experience, traumatic and enjoyable, I think it's important to ask, how many scour holes have you and or your graduate students fallen into since becoming a faculty member?
Fallen into, so unintentionally entered. Unintentional, probably like 5 to 10. And we're trying to really keep it under control because that is something that I'm always very afraid of. I talked about debris. I feel you never know what's in those holes, and what is in those holes can be unfriendly or dangerous to you. So we certainly try to stay out of them, but sometimes it happens. Sometimes, your mind goes somewhere else and you don't pay as much attention as you should. You're getting excited about something. And sometimes you do think that the sides around the scour hole are actually more stable than they possibly are. And sometimes you just have to get close to check on something, right? So, and then you're, I guess, going into a intentional risk, but we're paying attention to it. But I think I'm fortunate to say that I think we can still count it on our fingers that it happened unintentionally, and typically in more smaller ones.
That's good. When you say unfriendly things, what's your favorite thing you found in a scour hole?
Yeah, so the favorite and most unfavorite thing I think that I found was that after Hurricane Irma, we mobilized in southern Florida. So we started Cape Coral, that area, and traveled and down to the Keys. And there's a lot of bridges spanning over, or piers. And so we were inspecting, I think it was actually a bridge that spanned over a small inlet. And we wanted to look into the scour hole specifically. But so this area was kind of under 2 feet of water at that tidal stage. And so that is something where I'm not the biggest fan of wading through water, because I think that always brings risk. But in this case, it seemed very reasonable. Florida, the sun is shining, the water seemed calm, so why not? So, and I shuffle out there, and then I kind of cannot see it. It's a little murky, and I'm just using my foot to test how deep is it really. And suddenly there I feel some stirring. And it was a very angry stingray. And I mean, I think after we have learned from the crocodile hunter that don't mess with stingrays, right? You can handle alligators and crocodiles with those stingrays. So yeah, I was pretty spooked. And then of course, being spooked, shuffle back, fall over, still this angry stingray splashing around. But fortunately, we both went our own way, and I did not get pierced through my heart or any of that. But that was probably the most surprising, shocking, and it should not have been surprising because I knew that these guys hang out there, and I should have been smarter. But that's what happens sometimes. So yeah, that is, I think, the most surprising and maybe also unpleasant guy that I have met in a scour hole.
So I'm going to go next. And you walked right into this one because I wanted to ask it to you, and then you brought it up in your presentation. There are a lot of aspects of disaster reconnaissance where I don't want to say it doesn't matter how quickly you get in, but the stuff is, if you get in 4 days later or 5 days later, it's not a big deal. Scour is not like that. When you have gone on disaster reconnaissance, I mean, what have you guys done to make sure you can get in there as quickly as possible? I guess is a very boring part of the question. Well, not boring, but practical part of the question.
Sure.
The other part, though, is can you explain to everybody the kinds of differences that 1 or 2 days can make when you go in to look at one of these impacted areas?
Yeah, so I start with the second question, actually. So the figure that I showed, I mean, that was less than a day. So pretty much in that example, if you come 1 day later, there is no scour hole. And so then it's getting pretty tricky to actually, I mean, there is methods to maybe core the sediment, use some sub-bottom profilers to see if you can see layering of the freshly deposited, but it's getting pretty complicated, right? So literally a day, 12 hours can be too late, and that depends on how much sediment is being moved around in that environment, right? And in coastal environments, in particular near shore, that's typically a lot. To the first question, so I think one key thing is really to coordinate with local authorities, first responders, because sure, I think it is important that we understand this problem of scour better, so that we can actually mitigate impacts and risks. At the same time, we cannot do that at the price of being in the way of people who are still actively responding to a disaster, rescuing people, and so on. And so that means we have to coordinate with first responders, make sure that we can get safely in there, and we understand the risks that we are taking, because obviously we are also taking risks going into these disaster areas, but also that we are certainly not in the way of anyone for our measurements. And I think that has worked really great in the past. We have even collaborated with some first responders who had concerns that something ended up in the scour hole that they're searching for, and we have some equipment that can help finding things. And so in some cases, we pretty much offered our services then. And otherwise, we're really trying to find the balance, right? Get the measurements as soon as possible without putting anyone at risk, neither us nor the people who live there or have been impacted.
That was great. Thank you. Stacy, you're back. Your microphone is functional again. So
on my phone. Yeah, I don't know. So we did get our first question from Patrick Mans. It's kind of similar to mine, but I think we could take it in a different direction. They're interested to know, what is the scariest scour hole story you're willing to share with us? Maybe it doesn't have to be a critter discovered in the hole, but actually like what you saw, perhaps.
Yeah, so at river floods, I think so as I said, a lot of things end up in scour holes because things get deposited there. If we're thinking of bridges with pile caps, they serve really well to jam things under there. And that includes also people who got swept away. And so that is pretty horrible. And, I think it is, if we have the option and instruments to help with that, I think it's our duty to do so. But it's also a really, really hard part there. So that, I think, is for me, I don't know if scary is the right word, but it's probably the saddest, that is emotionally really the hardest to deal with, right? This idea I'm a researcher, right? I'm coming there to collect measurements, to advance science, to improve engineering. And I guess I'm not really emotionally trained or that good in dealing with such situations then. And so that is probably the scariest, or that is what I'm always the most scared of, that I find something that maybe is good that someone finds this, but at the same time, it's hard to be the person who does. Yeah.
I mean, I can only imagine. It wasn't even close to that, but after Hurricane Harvey, when we went out, I went out in Houston and we saw it was a bridge for a railroad, and trains are running again. Everything's kind of back to normal, so to speak. And this bridge had timber piles. And it was kind of funky because in the middle it had a pile cap, and the pile cap's like floating. There's debris all underneath it. And then my favorite, I still have a picture of it. 2 of the timber piles had duct tape on them. And I'm seeing, and I'm like, oh, that's a no for me. Driving over something that like literally there was duct tape on it. I don't know when that was there, but you're just like, sheesh, we need to call someone and tell someone right now before we, know, potentially bad would to happen. So I'll kick it to you, Brad.
Yeah, so we got another question in from the audience, and it matches up really well with one that I wanted to ask too. You showed the view of the North Sea platform there, but if people were listening, you said that was at a depth of 30 meters. In North America, we have offshore platforms, and in Australia, they are down way deeper than that. So Sean wanted to know, is there field instrumentation that may be relevant to understanding scour? And I wondered that specifically about some of those really deep water platforms. I mean, what do you use to be able to measure that?
Yeah, so the good news is the deeper the water gets, we're getting less concerned, because typically, not everywhere, and certainly not if you go towards slopes and stuff, but typically a rough rule of thumb can be that your currents are getting a little bit slower the deeper you go when you go to the seabed. So generally, this is not necessarily one of the biggest problems we are at all places concerned about, but it can be concerning. But so then we do have actually really fantastic tools that can reach that deep. So the images you saw from the North Sea, so they can be collected nowadays at thousands of meters of water depth. So nowadays, even with this idea of remote and autonomous vehicles, we have even more options, right? And I think that is really another important thing to consider. In my opinion, the time of sending people down there, and sorry to all the divers who don't want to hear that because you love diving, but I think generally for going into these dangerous spots, autonomous vehicles, remotely operated vehicles that can actually just go down there, you program them, they fly, they can sometimes even follow structures. We have vehicles that can just follow pipelines pretty much automatically. And they can collect these images. They can collect actually really good measurements of depth contours. They can even scan into the seabed with different frequencies. So there, this whole field of geoacoustics has really advanced, and subsea vehicles has so much advanced in the last 10 years that we have actually really great opportunities to get down there and do measurements.
I think that's, before Stacy goes with the next one, I think that's an important point, though, because you do hear this, I think most frequently with like bridge inspection, right? Where you have a lot of people using drones for this now, especially in remote areas. But the old guard is always kind of wanting to do visual inspections in person. You probably don't face as much of that because the scenario we just talked about would be much harder for a human to do.
Yeah, I think certainly in the deeper waters, no one is even discussing that, right? It's so hard to get a person down there. It's so dangerous, right? That these geophysical methods are just the way to go, and I think that's already pretty established. But I think in shallower waters, we still see that we're also facing this idea of like, civil engineering can be very slow with transitioning from things that have been done, right? Because it's a little bit the question like, okay, when do you feel confident enough in new technologies that you practically or literally put people's lives on those structures, right? And be confident. But I do believe that our technologies are, so I personally feel actually significantly more confident in some of my sonar data than what I could ever underwater determine, and I'm not, even if I would be a great diver, what I'm really not, but just thinking about visibility, thinking about orientation, right? So these, I can move it around the pod, I can go from different angles. It can stay down there as long as I want these vehicles pretty much, right? As long as the batteries hold, and then I charge them and send it again. So it allows me actually a much fuller picture. And these technologies are actually, in my opinion, so mature at this point that there is not really much of a question that we cannot trust them. It's more, I feel at this point, actually, of proving them in different settings and getting people to know about it and feeling confident about it.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And then there's like the other side of it. So, like you can use ground penetrating radar, you can use GPR. And it's pretty well established for Scour. It doesn't, like all geophysics, it doesn't work for every soil type and every contrast, but it's a very good tool. And I had this opportunity to go out and we were using electrical resistivity to look at Scour because we can measure underwater, and that's pretty fun. And we could tow behind a boat, and that's pretty fun. And I thought I'll contrast it with GPR, but I didn't have a unit here yet. And the very famous archaeologist was like, "You'll not be putting my GPR unit in like a flotation device." And I was like, trust me, I'm an engineer. Like, it's not going to leak. And it was a hard pass from him. I guess he didn't know me that well, or maybe he knew me too well. I don't know which direction we go. But you have to kind of sometimes convince lots of people of these technologies to get them to adopt it or let you borrow it or potentially break it. Any and all of the above.
Yeah, and we break a lot of instruments.
I do break a lot, yeah. Especially anytime you're towing anything in the water, like everything's going great, and then a tree. And then $3,000 later, right? You're like, well, oops, should have seen that tree coming.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't even see what happens. You just bring the instrument up, right? And you have a damage on it, and you never know what is down there.
My favorite, this happened about a year ago. I had a new grad student and brand new equipment. And I was, you always encourage students to go and try. And I always tell them, if you don't break something, you're not trying, right? But, you also have the caveat of like, this costs $50,000, so don't break this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Break the other thing. Break the $2,000.
Something
like
small.
The $500 one, yeah.
Right. And he took the initiative and went out with his dad on the boat, and they went too slow. And we think they dragged the cable on the ground. And he's pulling it up, and the cable is just like spliced all down. And he's like, she's gonna kill me.
Yeah.
So yeah, underwater accidents I found have been more expensive than land accidents, more than once, sadly.
And I think there's also the nature of it that on land, that's where we move around all the time, right? We are more comfortable. We can see. So I think on land is more where we have our natural senses, right?
Yeah.
Underwater is is always different, right? And you cannot see, and you're working more in the blind, and sometimes there's things that you didn't anticipate, and yeah.
I did find, like, from my experience with all those things, that I felt like I've done my life wrong. Like, you're going in the right direction. Anything where I get to go and be out on the water and be collecting the data are always so much harder to process, but collecting the data is always so much more fun. Like with the wind in your hair on the boat, or even one time I was dragging something with a canoe. It's way more fun than like trucking it on land and carrying the heavy stuff, right?
Yeah, it's great 60% of the time, and the other times is when, you know, the ice is freezing to your eyebrows, and you know your fingers are getting blue, and or you're getting green in the face.
I had an undergrad that came back a little green one time. He had to go sit down for a little bit in the shade, so that was a new experience that he was not prepared for. So on that note, how many boats do you have access to, or water vessels, and which one is your favorite? And has your favorite changed over the years? There you go, 3 different questions at once.
Okay, I don't know how many vessels. I don't think I can.
That's
even
not fair. That's not.
I think I have been on a few very special ones. So I think I'm, together with one other physical oceanographer in the world, I'm the only one who has worked on both of the big research swaths. So Planet is one, and Kailumwana, who's not in service anymore, was another one. So that's pretty much like a huge catamaran that is standing on 2 submarines. And because it's actually swimming with these underwater bodies, these devices are super stable. And you can also do cool things like you're pumping water and then they're tilting. And so that was really cool. And, you know, I was on them fairly early in my career, and I didn't really realize how cool it actually was until many years later. But that was really cool. I dove with submersibles, what was also quite an experience, in particular if you're not going through a long training, but you're just showing up and you get a day before and they're like, yeah, tomorrow you go on that submersible and you dive into that canyon. I'm like, okay. And so that was quite something. And then you start worrying about things like, so you're with 3 people in this little capsular, right? And there's obviously no bathroom in there. There's like a space bottle that obviously I'm not very trained to use, right? And then you do stupid things, right? You stop drinking like the day before and just hope for the best, right? And then you're in this, anyway, so that was really cool. It was a great experience. I did 2 dives there. Do I need the experience again? No, probably not. But it was a cool experience at that time. We have worked from stand-up paddle boards, kayaks, canoes. We had in Texas like big spiders jumping into canoes. That was pretty wild. I've worked from really big boats, 300 feet and longer. I've worked from very fast boats with the Navy, and so yeah, a lot of different ones. And I don't know if I have a favorite. You know, like the small ones can be really cool because you can, if the weather is nice and the water is nice, you can just, you know, and there's a break and everyone agrees on, you can maybe just hop in and swim with the dolphins, right? And things like that. Or the big ones can be really nice because you're going really special places with it. I do like these kind of like rips. So these inflatables with they're really sporty and they can get you in and out tricky places. If you have a good navigator, they're awesome. Yeah, so I don't have a really big favorite. What I will admit is that 10 years ago, I was much more adventurous than I'm today. So today I feel often like, I don't need to go on that thing, you know, and I'm better with boats than airplanes. Small airplanes are getting really tricky for me, but boats, I'm still a little bit better. But still, I can certainly tell that my adventure level or my need for adventure level has decreased with the years.
How do you separate that, though? Because, I mean, you told the story about going in the submersible, right? And your emotions about that situation have to impact your ability to, you know, analyze whatever situation, collect data, and on and on and on. I mean, how do you manage that mentally?
Yeah, I think it's and people who have worked with me, I hope they agree. So I try to stay pretty calm, but I also try to trust my guts. So if I really feel something is not right, even if I don't have a really good explanation, I try to take a step back and practically reanalyze. There's a lot of trust to the team. You know, I have the luck that I have worked and I'm still working with really fantastic collaborators, staff, teams who I trust very much. And that makes a big thing too, because I trust that they are maybe, you know, like, for example, I typically don't operate the vessels, right? And so I trust them to do that. And I know I can rely on them to also make the right call. So I think an important thing is, for example, me personally, if a captain says, this is getting sketchy, I say, let's turn around, right? So I'm not like, oh, no, we have to push out there. Sometimes you have to discuss, okay, could we still get this one measurement? Or, you know, now we are out here and no, you know, everyone has struggled to get here and do this. Can we try this? But it has to be a discussion. Yeah, and I think, to be honest, another thing is also if it really just all gets to you, you know, just step to the side, you know, go cry for 5 minutes, and then, you know, wipe up the tears and be brought back with a calmer head. And so I think that's my approach there.
We actually do have a couple of more questions from the audience. And so submit yours if you've got them. Don't hold on, because if we close this out and you still have a question for Nina, you'll regret it, at least for a while. I don't know about forever. This one came in from Patrick as well, and it's a simple one, so we're going to have to wing it a little bit on this one. How do you go about determining the method of mitigation?
Different direction.
Yeah, that is a different direction. So I mean, first, I mean, I'm really very heavily in the site investigation world, right? So I'm a very data-driven person, but I think as probably everyone on the call who is involved in field data collection knows, there's also limits of what is doable, right? And at some point you have to make a decision with what you have. But I do believe, so first of all, try to get the best data you can in a reasonable way, right? So that you have actually the information to make a good call. Then bring everyone to the table who's really relevant, right? So because just from my perspective, things may be important, but then someone else on the team with a different background may have some other things in mind, right? So listen to their concerns, and there can be a really wide range of concerns, right? Like can start with things like costs, right? I know that, I mean, we should always obviously do the best design we can, but there's also a reality of costs we are all aware of, right? So that also has to be considered, right? Because if you put a lot of money in that place, maybe there's other places who also need some money. Maybe there can be found a way in between and everyone is still safe. So I think that balance is a really important one. And then I will admit, and that's probably also the researcher in me, that I do like modern and creative solutions that are very specific to the local conditions, right? So talking about nature-inspired or nature-based can be a great idea to look into. May not be the right thing for every place. Combinations of green and gray, I think, are great. But I think an important perspective from my point of view is it's most important you find the right fit for that specific place. Obviously, you should learn from other examples, but this one solution fits all does typically not apply here. And so you have to put all the variables on the table, discuss the different perspectives, and then find, based on the local conditions and the best knowledge, like the best solution. Also for what is the goal, right? Am I just trying to practically have a temporary solution that makes sure that people for the next few weeks can safely cross or get from A to B? Or are we talking about a 20, 50 year design? And then maybe the solutions also look different.
Oh, I like that. We're gonna keep it serious for a minute, and then we'll close with some fun stuff later. But the two that I really wanted to ask you, we'll start out with this one. About 250 miles that way right now, there's a big hurricane. we've got a lot of data to support that, yes, these storms are getting more severe over time. And I know you've looked at a lot of data. What has that meant for you? I guess I wanted to ask this specifically because it's a more Atlantic focused question. This isn't something that people on the West Coast really have to think about.
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky one, right? Because again, you have to consider a lot of different variables, right? So I think we are seeing hurricanes. We will continue seeing hurricanes. They are getting stronger, and we are seeing more of them quicker after each other. I think our region, the last year or 2 years, it's like a whole triple slammer there, right? With 3 fairly big hurricanes right after each other. So obviously that's like conditions that when, in particular when a lot of community developed, no one really thought about, right? And I think one thing that I also always like to point out is that coastal environments are dynamic. Communities or our style of living is actually not very dynamic anymore, right? I mean, our houses are not rolling back, right? Where they are. Our bridges are not rearranging because the riverbank started meandering, right? And so I think there's a little bit of this question of change is faster than actually our redesigns, but it's also maybe a question of like, we have all this infrastructure, right? I mean, how do you replace and rebuild and retrofit all of that on time? And again, it's like, it's cost. It's also just, labor and manpower, having actually enough people to do all of this, right? Yeah, so how do we deal with this? I think we do have to be more proactive and less reactive. And now I know that's a very general statement, but I think, again, like specific solutions have to be local or at least regional, right? And we have to think more into the future and be more proactive and be prepared and thinking about pathways from how do we respond, but also how can we change things and be better prepared. But these solutions can look in different places, very different. I think a lot of different groups of people have to do their part there. That starts from people who have to find the funding for it, right? Or who have to practically prioritize, to people who have to live with these solutions and be okay with that, to us civil engineers, geotech engineers, right, who are probably more on the solution side, right, and offering different solutions for these different scenarios. So I think one thing that I feel is important, we're already doing this, but we have to do it more. We have to talk more to our colleagues from other disciplines, and we have to start being actually more coherent, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary teams that really find creative solutions to these problems that fit for that problem. I don't know how we deal with that labor problem. We have to do more shows like this, I guess, drawing more people into our field, because we do need more people to work on this, right? Because there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be addressed, right? So I think that is something we have to look into. Yeah, being more proactive, working with a bigger group of people, thinking more creatively, learning more from nature and accepting, or maybe accepting is the wrong word, but understanding more the dynamics of the systems we are living in, and the fact that now, I don't know, maybe in the 50s, people thought more in 20 years or decadal phases. Now with infrastructure investments, we are thinking much longer, right? What means we are pushing into a timeline where these coastal environments are just changing massively, right? And in some places even quicker and in some a little bit slower. But I think that is kind of, I know I rambled a lot, but it's just a really big, it's a really big question, right? So I think it needs to be tackled, and it even starts with raising the awareness for it, right? Always just being reactive and just like letting it happen. I think we have to start getting ahead of the game, right? Instead of just running after the events, we have to get in front of them. I think that's somehow we have to get there.
So I'll give you one then that's sort of related, but a little more specific. And it's about extreme tides. You've been in two places when you were a grad student at Dalhousie, and then just to the north of you, the Georgia coastline, where everybody looks on a map and it's concave like this. Tides are really extreme. What's the relationship between those larger tidal fluctuations in Scour?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the larger your tidal prism, the more water you're pushing in and out, and that is something that I think a lot of people forget, right? So the tides are not happening just occasionally, right? They come over and over, and they're just working and grinding on it, right? And if you have a big tidal prism, you have a lot of water squeezing through these channels every single day, and you can 100% rely on it, and they will keep coming, and you will not stop them, right? So I think that it's actually a really good and interesting problem, because often, because tides are regular, people are actually forgetting about them until you have to drive your car every single day or 200 days per year through a foot of water, seawater, that is slowly eating your car away, right? Until then, a lot of people don't really think about tides as a threat, right? But they are creeping in. They are actually very powerful. And so for Scour specifically, I think in large tidal range environments, you have to realize the amount of water that is pushing through. And then if you add on to that a hurricane, and you're unlucky that your high tide is coming together with your storm surge, then suddenly your tide is actually getting a really risky problem, while at the same time your tide can be your best friend, right? If you have a nice big tidal range and your storm surge comes at low tide, then your tide can actually be your saving grace. So it's an important component to consider that I think often is undervalued.
Oh, I like that. Thank you.
Nina takes
Back
note.
to Stacy.
Student dissertation, right? From Brad.
Ooh, yeah. As long as I get a citation, I'm good.
There you go. So our show is so popular. After 2 episodes, we get questions before or ideas before the show, and we got one from Jim Withiam, and it was more of a comment, but it was on. I was like, wow, this is the 3 things that I kind of love the most. It's from California, and they're actually crowdsourcing ideas because they're having massive coastal erosion problems around their railroad. So like literally the 3 things I do research on, right? And I was like, oh, I love it. But they said that no matter what they do, they're having this continual challenge, how often it closes down this massive passenger rail system. And now they're just going to the public and saying like, hey, do you have any new and innovative ideas for how we might stabilize or what we might do? Like, should we move the track entirely? Or are there solutions we haven't thought of? So I know you live generally in the hurricane, and although I think you've done some Alaska work as well, right?
Yeah.
Have you done any work with those kind of persistent challenges on the West Coast? We're having more erosion problems just from, I guess, beach retreat is what I'm going to call it in the most untechnical of terms.
Yeah, I think that's not only on the West Coast, there's a lot of places in the world where that applies, right? Where practically the shoreline retreat has just eaten into, as I said, like infrastructure that was placed in places where, when it was built, everyone thought it's well away from the coastline, and now it's not anymore, right? And I could list like a whole bunch of infrastructure systems that are affected in different places by that. I mean, the obvious one is that if you can stop practically the erosion of the shoreline, in theory, then your infrastructure system stays at the certain distance, right? But that's the tricky part. How do you do that, right? And there's different very hard and softer solutions and combinations of those. And I think that goes back to the topic of understanding actually your local system. So what is really the biggest driver, right? And then what are solutions you can live with, right? Because there may be solutions that can actually really stop locally the erosion, but then down the line, maybe someone has to pay for that, right? And down the line could be in time or could be in space, actually, right? So in particular, for some hard solutions, we are seeing that it, helps in that specific place, but then someone a little bit down the beach is paying the price for it, right? And so I think you have to look into that very carefully. An advantage of that is actually, since it is happening steadily, in my opinion, it gives you a better condition to actually collect comprehensive data and trying to understand the system that you're in, developing possibly a model that would allow you to practically play with different solutions, and play them out. And what are the costs, right? Like, not only, and I'm not talking dollar costs, but also what are your costs that you're paying, right? Like, I mean, we have seen coarse sand beaches being converted into gravel and shingle beaches, right? So obviously that will make a lot of people pretty unhappy, but the gravel is certainly, or cobbles are less erodible than the sand, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say, the costs, you typically always pay a price in some way, right? And you have to figure out what is the best balance between what you will have to pay for this and get the result you want. And then really often, in my opinion, you have, if your problem is a certain spot, you have to look significantly further, because otherwise you may find a solution for here and then things really go bad around you and suddenly you're in bigger trouble. So I think I think these systems have the advantage that you can steadily observe the problem and maybe have a slightly better chance to actually understand the system and come up with good solutions. And I think solutions locally, really understanding nature is pretty smart. So, and sometimes nature puts really good pointers, and if we just pay enough attention, right? So locally, what are we seeing around? What is stopping it, right? And that can be from certain vegetation types, what is, I think, what a lot of people connect with that, right? But it can also be other things, like maybe even some animals that do certain things, right? Are creating. One thing that I'm very interested in is how certain critters are changing porosity, and with that, practically infiltration, exfiltration processes, right? And are there maybe critters who are actually helping stabilizing things by offering enough porosity to infiltrate more and do less exfiltration, right? So these are small details. So I think, understanding the system, getting all the information as you can, and then look around you, understanding and trying to find solutions that actually work for this specific environment. And that sounds much easier than it is. It's actually really hard. And also understanding that sometimes you may actually have to bite the bullet, right? That maybe a better solution from a lot of perspective is moving that infrastructure system.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I have one more question. I'm sad to say, if you had a question, you have missed your opportunities set aside from not stalking, but gently approaching Dr. Stark at a conference in a very normal way. You can ask her at a different time. We are going to close today with just wondering, you've been, I feel like, to some really cool places. And sometimes cool places have terrible weather. So if you were to merge the two, what was like your best day in your favorite place? Like everything just perfectly aligned. In my mind, the sun is shining, but maybe not. Maybe you liked it because it was raining. What's your best one?
I have a lot of really good ones, but I will just pick this one. So we worked in the Canadian Beaufort Sea, so pretty much like in the Arctic. And the small inflatable boat we used was shared between different groups. And so our time slot was in the middle of the night. So it was summer in the Arctic. So no problem, right? But so what happened is, and I didn't really think about it because you always just like, oh yeah, sun is up 24/7, so no problem. And that is true. But the sun is still going down and then coming back up. Right? So you have actually this really cool, you get practically your sunset and your sun up in just like one session, what is really, really cool. So we're out there in the middle of the night experiencing that, and everyone is in their survival suits, right? And we're on this inflatable, really powerful rip. And it just felt as if you're in like one of these hero movies, right? And with that sun on the horizon in the background. And it was just fantastic. Plus we got at that time of day really good measurements and everything felt good and everyone had a good time, and it was just a great place. And we had wild belugas around us. So I mean, how much? So that is one way I'm like, okay, how much better can it get?
That is pretty much a unicorn of all experiences, because I love that you add in, and the data were good. Because, you know, sometimes it's like the prettiest day and you come back in the office and you're like, oh no, what do we do with this nonsense?
Yep.
Cool.
Well, that was a great day.
I think that is one of my favorite things about following Nina on LinkedIn or social media in general, because you know, you're reading along, you get these amazing photos and you're like, oh wow, she's working on this really cool project, and holy crap, there's a manatee like right there in one of the photos.
Yeah.
So that I would urge, I mean, if she's not too creeped out by it, I would urge our viewers to connect with Nina on LinkedIn. Amazing photos. Of course, she's doing incredible research too, and she's got a great team with her. But all throughout the year, it's fantastic stuff. So thank you for posting that stuff and sharing it and letting everybody learn a little bit more about what you're working on.
Thank you.
This was pretty good. This was a good episode 2 of Hour of Scour. I feel like we're going to be hard pressed to top this one. I want to say thanks to our viewers that asked questions today, and to those who didn't ask questions, just for hanging around. We still appreciate that, but it's better when you ask questions. If you liked what you saw, and again, you probably did because you're here at the end, click like, subscribe, get notifications, and yes, of course, we'll let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Nina, thanks again for sharing all the stories, answering the questions, and you felt like you rambled. That was great, though. That's why I love having academics on these things, because you guys can say whatever you want. You're not worried about it. And it ends up being really insightful. And my quote of the day, nature is pretty smart. Nina Stark.
Yeah.
That was great. And Stacy, great job moderating as always. So thank you for doing that. For all of our viewers, our next live stream is in 5 days, 2 p.m., back to the regular time. Don't let it throw you off. It's Geo Extreme Preview number 2 to help you get ready for our Extreme Events Conference that's going to be happening in November. We'll have Michael Bennett, the geotechnical history blogger and someone who was on a boat with Nina relatively recently.
Yes.
He will be talking about the St. Francis Dam failure northeast of Los Angeles in 1928. Was a catastrophic event that we learned a lot from. So you're going to want to be there for that. Tuesday at 2, you can register for that on our Eventbrite page, along with all of the upcoming GI live streams in the Summer of Live and beyond. So we hope to see you out there for that. Our producer today was Aurora Flieger, and we will see everybody really soon with another Geo-Institute live stream.